I worked too hard for
People
this.
don't even understand nothing. Come on.
It's not right. It's not right. It's not right what y'all doing. I came from the ghetto too. Same as all of you did.
Y'all need to listen.
But you know, y'all mess up my business. And you call it black power. You mad at the white man. Why destroy my business? Why destroy my truck? Why steal my computer? I'm trying to make it. Could you understand that? Can't y'all see it? I'm trying to make it.
You may think this video is the results of the 2020 riots from the police brutality of George Floyd, but this video is for the aftermath of the riots in '92 of Rodney King. Sadly, time has gone on, but things haven't changed at all. That's because police brutality has a long history in the US, and that hasn't been dealt with due to racism and white supremacy. Good day, my people. It's the King, Aaron D. Wiggins, and this is People's Public Health, where we talk about all things public health. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe so you can keep up with all things public health and this channel. Because today, I want to talk about police brutality as a public health issue. Police brutality is the use of excessive force against civilians by police officers. Although police brutality is an American issue affecting all people, the primary target of police brutality is its black citizens. This is because police brutality is a tool of white supremacy to hurt the black community. White supremacy is a real thing that was at the inception of this country. The founding fathers made a declaration that all men were created equal and that each man has the right to pursue happiness. Yet this is self-evident that they only meant white men. Because they wouldn't have made so many different rules and regulations to keep people of color at a disadvantage and the minority. From slavery to Jim Crow, to segregation, to voting rights, to war on drugs, mass incarceration, discriminatory loans and housing practices, and many more. I mean, even until the voting rights of 1920, women weren't even allowed to vote. And that includes black or white. I say this to help people realize that these are the tools that they use to help keep black families separated, poor, uneducated, and the minority, while making white men the majority and the one in power. If we do not live in a white supremacist society, then why do we live in a country where black people make up the majority of arrests and the prison population, with only being 12% of the US population? And no, it's not because we are inherently criminal, because that itself is a racist sentiment, but because the criminal justice system is pitted against us. It all starts with these bad officers. They use discriminatory practices against black people to make more arrests, and prosecutors use extreme sentencing to keep us in jail. For example, black and white Americans use marijuana at the same rates. Yet, black people are twice more likely to get arrested and have a longer jail sentence times for the use of that. This targeting has put us at a higher rate of conflict with police officers. Black men are 2.5 times more likely to get killed by a police officer than a white woman, and black women are 1.3 times more likely to get killed by officers than a white woman. These facts have made it so much harder for people to be compliant with another black person getting killed, when it's supposed to be treated equally by the system we pay into. And no bigger example of this is the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So many things have added fuel to this raging storm of call to justice for black lives. The US is still going through a major global pandemic called the COVID-19. Check out other videos I've talked about it below. This virus has led to the worst economic crash and the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression, leaving many people jobless while facing a virus that could end their lives. Naturally, some people are seeing this as an opportunity to take advantage of peaceful protests to riot and steal from businesses. This has been a common thing with peaceful protests. In the civil rights movement, subverters and white supremacists, like undercover cops, would break into buildings to ensure a riot or theft. And these tactics are still used today to delegitimize peaceful movements. Moreover, with elected officials implying violence and a show of dominance over protests, it's important now more than ever to keep protests peaceful. How do we do that? It's being done already. Despite what pessimists have been displaying, the vast majority of protests have been peaceful. It's time to protest even more and to organize, mobilize to ensure a peaceful protest stays peaceful. Organizers in the civil rights movements were trained to take a beating, to make sure that protests remain peaceful. All I'm saying is that there should be no violence at all. Yet how do we ensure that? Counteract deterrence of peaceful protests. From the orders of elected officials, police officers shoot tear gas, pepper spray, and less lethal rubber bullets at protesters. To counteract these actions, we should have certain organizers dressed in a certain color aesthetic to attack these tear gas canisters with cones and waters and bring trash can lids and other shields to protect protesters from rubber bullets and pepper spray. We can also use code signs to communicate with leaders of protests and protest goers. It is very important that we have an open line of communications from the regular protesters that are participating in these events and these organizers themselves. We need some type of way of communication where we can send signals to each other for products that we are needed at the front line. For example, code signs for umbrellas for pepper sprays or trash can lids for rubber bullets, or antacid for tear gas. And even for these more dire situations, it's important that we use blockades to our advantage. They're here to protect us from subverters and evil people trying to attack us with vehicles. So we should use blockades to prevent people from driving into our crowd. Even police officers would take the advantage and use their cars to damage protesters or hurt protesters. You gotta flow like water. We can get ahead of police by moving quickly when military units arrive to make their way towards you and disperse and reform in different areas. I understand that some police officers can be used to help keep the protesters safe and protected. But for massive military units that have been used throughout this whole week, that have been shown to be aggressive towards protesters and use some of these less lethal forces, it is important that we be able to disperse at a moment's notice and reform at a moment's notice. With these communications, we can be able to still protest peacefully and not even engage with some police officers. Finally, we have to train and arm some protesters to intimidate militia law enforcement and detain looters for arrest. Sadly, it seems the only way for cops to not harass protesters is for them to be armed. This is self-evident when you have citizens fighting their own interests and storming Capitol buildings with firearms to risk their lives during a global pandemic. COVID-19 is a pathogen that can easily spread from officers and other bystanders by one simply affected person. And those who were at those protests were endangering themselves and other people. Funny enough, they weren't even pepper sprayed or tear gas to leave the area. Their protest was peaceful, even though they had guns. Now, these are all my theoretical ideas. I'm not implying that anyone have to put themselves in a situation where they take my ideas. But if you choose to do so, it is all up to you to move this, to start a change in a positive direction. I don't suggest people arm themselves with bullets or even have less lethal rubber bullets. They could be empty for all we know. But because a gun, a firearm, is such an intimidating force, they can be used to prevent a confrontation between a looter or a cop. However, these are all going to be trained volunteers. I do not suggest a random person come up into a peaceful protest with a firearm because it could be a danger to themselves and other people. Civil rights leaders were trained to deal with way much more violence and a danger to themselves. It's only our responsibility to us to volunteer to be trained to deal with these certain situations. But if you don't like my ideas, please tell me in the comments below. This is an open dialogue where we can always talk about ways to better improve our circumstance. So if you like what you've seen on the channel, please like and subscribe and follow and stay tuned to the next video. Till next time, I'll be the people. Will you?